Hello and welcome to the Founder Foreword, a podcast series with founders to help us learn about going beyond seed. Today we have Pankaj Vermani, founder and CEO of Clovia, a premier D2C fashion, lingerie, and personal care brand in India that successfully exited last year to the Reliance Group. Beyond Clovia, Pankaj actively advises startups in the internet, mobile, and e-com spaces and regularly writes for technology blogs on team building, scale, and business strategy. He actively practices meditation, is a theatre buff, and performs in the professional theatre circle. Welcome to the Founder Forward, the Going Beyond Seed webinar that is run by WaterBridge Fast Forward. And thank you so much for giving us your time today.
Thank you so much. An absolute delight to be here.
Pankaj, I was doing my background checks and my homework for this podcast. And as I was reading through all your 5 backgrounds last evening, of course, the first thing I wanted to ask you was, how did 5 of you get together and think about starting a fashionable lingerie brand in India? We live in a country where the country's largest cricket and movie stars are willing to endorse men's innerwear brands, but you won't find the largest female stars in this country endorse women's innerwear brands. And there is, of course, like a stigma. Many people struggle to even say the word lingerie in public, but would love to get a backstory about how the 5 of you came together. Was it one aha moment? Was it many months or maybe many years in the making and baking? I'm aware that you're a 3X founder, but would love to start off with the backstory and into, that one idea that became Clovia.
Right. So my personal background is that, my father used to run a lingerie store, right? So I had some background of selling lingerie, of course, in a very different environment. And I had done an edtech business, prior to Clovia, right? And way ahead of its time. So my core thesis was that I'm going to do an aspirin business, not a vitamin business when I go next, right? And that was the only important point that I had. Clovia was the idea of Neha, who's a co-founder, and she basically started talking about it, way back in 2012, more around personal experience. She comes from Haridwar, which is a tier 2 town, and she kept saying that, after class 8th, I've seen a lot of my friends change their lifestyles. They some of them stopped playing sports. And I think that is something which is worth giving your life for, how you could kind of, start spending more energy into actually changing that at a social level. And I was my cynical self that, is it an aspirin problem or is it a vitamin problem? Do people really need it? And I think for good 6 to 8 months, we just contemplated that. And there was a lot of background research we did, met a lot of people, funded some researchers with some friends. We said that, why don't you go more in the market and find out. And the more we spoke to people, the more we read about this, the more we realized that, lingerie is a very unique problem. It's a very complex product with a very complex distribution because 40 plus sizes are there. And so at one point of time, Neha was sure all along, and I was the cynical one.
Yeah.
And at one point of time, the data backed it up, and I said, hey, this sounds, this seems to be making sense. And somewhat we converged. The biggest problem was that, why I came from an operational technology background. Neha came more from a marketing, sales, and of course, consumer side. We still didn't have the real thing, the product, right? And when things have to work out, the stars always align. So, we got in touch with Suman, who had been designing and making lingerie for good 15 years till at that point of time. And we told him that this entire ecosystem is, people are already starting to solve discovery when the product doesn't exist, and we wanted to solve that. We wanted to do something which is, affordable, premium, high on aspiration, low on price, something that can be extended. And we wanted to use internet. And Suman was, that point of time, was designing for people like Sarah Jessica Parker, for Amanda Bynes, Venus Williams. And I think within a week of our conversation, he just packed his bags from Mumbai and came back to town. So, and it was like, it was literally, so we could call that our aha moment. And post that, once the business started to roll, Soumya came on board and Abhay came on board, and both came with very unique skill sets. Abhay came as the CFO, Soumya came in as growth head. And over a period of time, it was just the 5 of us that stuck around. So I think when things have to work out, the stars align on their own. And I think luck had a lot of role to play, and a little bit of cynicism, sprinkled over it. And that's how the recipe was created.
Yeah, it's also useful to know how long businesses take to really scale, build out, and mature. And it's more than a 10-year journey for you today. Of course, you have a successful exit, but you actually started before even the word D2C was mainstream. And so you did unconventional things, not just in terms of the actual product, starting off with lingerie. Today, you're the house of Clovia. You do more than just lingerie. You do like loungewear, activewear, even beauty and personal care. But you did a lot of things differently. But you were lucky or serendipitous, fortunate to raise a seed round pretty much at the very start. And we learned a little about the founding team's background, but take us through that journey of, was it really as easy as I'm making it out to be? And as you set out your first check and your first external round of funding, take us through what some of those pitches were like. How did your first pitch deck look like? That would be interesting to know.
So, initially when we started, the whole idea was that I had come out of a business, and we realized that the amount of money that we had with us is not going to be enough, because this was a very strong supply chain. We had to create the product, and it's a very complex supply chain. So there was an initial amount of capital that was required to disrupt the whole supply chain. If you were to we didn't want to go to China, procure certain product and start selling and rebrand, right? The idea was that we are going to, so we wanted to buy every hook, we wanted to buy every elastic, and do it ourselves. And that, of course, required a lot of, initially it required some money. And then there was this other battle of online as well. So, we were trying to fight battles on two fronts. So we spoke to a bunch of folks, and we were lucky enough to find some people who were excited about the idea, right? But it was more of a let's see where this goes kind of a situation, frankly. It was more of a paper plan conversation with them where we said, hey, this is what we're going to do. And of course, it was all
truly an idea stage company then.
It was an idea
backing a prolific team. Yeah.
True, but at the same time, it's never easy, because when you're going to somebody at an idea stage, you do not call a lot of shots, right? You have to be very, you have to be on your toes at all points of time to to make things happen. And so we were lucky to get that first check. We were lucky to have people backing us, and by God's grace, we were able to answer it in the right way also in terms of returns for them. But it wasn't easy, right? Because I remember this one night when I just woke up and, and I spoke to Neha and I said, I don't think this is going to happen, right? Because it had been 6 months and we were struggling to kind of build the supply chain. And then, of course, that's the power of having co-founders, right? And then all of us, like midnight.
And I was actually going to ask you that next question on, of course, it's a euphoria of a first fundraise. You're like, okay, we've arrived, we've raised our first round of funding. We're like, like a legit startup now. But take me through those first 100 days or maybe those first 6 months through that roller coaster immediately thereafter, where you're just like getting back to now actually building the nuts and bolts of the business.
I think our entire team is very grounded because we have never got things easy, right? I mean, we've had to always stick to, always looking towards the sky, but always feet firmly on the ground, because we had no other option, right? It is a category which had always, there's been an absolute graveyard of brands, right? In this category, where there's so many, and everybody would say that, what would you do differently? Where there's so much stuff that has happened. So even today, I keep telling people who've raised rounds and are very excited about it that, getting money to buy ammunition is not equal to winning the war, right? These are two different things. So the moment we had the ammunition, we hadn't even entered the war. It was just money for the ammunition, right? So I think the first and most important thing, we divided work, right? So by that time, Soumya and Abhay had not come in. And so between the three of us, Neha started working immediately on the product side with Suman, right? And also started to build the, so it was more of a soul searching project as to know what the brand will stand for, because the DNA was, the seed was getting sown, right? And I started working more on the technology side of things, of how the distribution of it's going to happen on the internet. And I think the first 100 days was, for example, and we took some very steep targets for ourselves, right? For example, Suman was given literally 90 days to set up a factory, figured it out, and do it at razor thin budgets, because we had initial seed capital, we didn't want to waste any, a single penny. And I think that worked very well for us even till date. I went on to go on the website work to create the backend engine and stuff. And Neha worked completely on the marketing side of it, how she's going to, present it to the world. Even the name was getting, defined while we were speaking. And so I think it was more dividing work and conquering our individual ecosystem. And I think one fine day, we kind of merged it and launched it. So the first 100 is, frankly, I don't even remember, because there was no time to remember anything. It was a very crazy time.
Yeah. And you took some unconventional, I would say, or tough or hard, I'm sure it was, bets in terms of how you would execute. For one, I think, again, you used omni-channel even before it was a buzzword, and you had stores from very early on. You also, as you briefly alluded to before, chose to build out your own supply chain, do your own manufacturing, because it was very hard to just drop ship from China and just like slap your label and sell. Just take us through some of those thought processes, because everything requires a capital allocation and a budget allocation. And I'm sure being constrained with a seed check as you were at that point of time, like just run us through some of those, decision-making sessions that you had with Neha. Yeah.
I think one thing that we very clearly realized was, in our category, if you are giving to a third party to make, it will be at least 15,000 pieces, a minimum order quantity, right? So that you could do 3 colors. So it'll be 5,000 per color and 15,000 pieces for a style. And what we were trying to do was, can we make like, we wanted to cater to multiple body types and wanted to cater to multiple solutions for different people, right? So we couldn't make 15,000 pieces of, 500 SKUs that we wanted to make for different problem solutions. So we wanted to disrupt and say, can I make 500 pieces? And the only way the world was doing it at that point of time was going to China, right? And going to China effectively means that you lose control on your quality. Unless you have higher volumes, you will not have a very strong quality process. And our thing was that we are into a second skin business. And even today, I say that, lingerie is like first date, right? If it doesn't go well, she's never going to talk to you again. So, so the whole thesis was that you are working on the product. So the only thing that you have to have control is the product. Is the product. And so I think that decision worked very well for us. How we cracked it was, and a lot of credit to Suman for this. We got hold of certain guys who were running shop floors for bigger factories, and we gave them some money and said, why don't you set up your own factory and you become our partner? Let's be Siamese twins. Either you make 40,000 rupees, I'll ensure you make at least 25. And then it all just boils down to whether we'll both swim together or not. I think that worked out super well for us as a team, because we and the partners kind of grew together. And once that model got sorted, then we were quickly able to replicate it at multiple. So we
and
were
what
the only
about
ones
on
who were
the
doing
distribution?
500. Sorry, you're saying we were the only ones who were able to crack 500 pieces of a high quality lingerie manufacturing in India, because that helped us to not have hedging against dollar as well, right? So the dollar problem was also not there, which a lot of other people.
And so help me understand the width as well, because you're also known to have several sizes, up to 40 sizes, and you were very clear from day one that you wanted to be fashionable. And I always remember Samanya telling me this, that it needs to feel like you're buying fashion. Why is it always whites and blacks and beiges? So we need color, we need size. So the hack really, and what you did different with manufacturing, was lower MOQs, but also that gave you flexibility to have like multiple assortments and go wider with your catalog.
So somebody had told me a very profound thing one day, that when we used to get a lot of no from VCs, right? One of the most unique and nice no was when somebody said that you're in a product space which is the most complex and the most commoditized. So you're a complex product being sold at commodity pricing. So, he said, you're the worst of both worlds. And we came back and we said, we got to fix that, right? That's how the world perceives. Then people have to pay at least a higher amount, if not a higher amount, at least they have to pay more product for more products, right? And that could only happen when you try and do different things and make people pick different stuff. Macros helped as well, because the more we were trying to do things, the more we realized that people want to go buy more product. It's just that more product wasn't available, right? So there was a need, and there was our need, and there was a customer's need, and it matched very well. What worked very well for us was technology backend. What we ended up doing was that we built some planning engines, which could very clearly tell us winners or losers, and we could scale the winners, and we could quickly tank the losers. So very soon the pattern started emerging. We'll literally put in like 150 to 200 new styles every month. And the system would just point out, say, hey, these 10 make sense, and rest you should just phase out.
And that's why having your own manufacturing helps, because you can actually go back and replenish that inventory faster than working with third-party China vendors, especially.
Absolutely. So one is, one is basically go horizontal, and then once you've figured out, how do you go vertical? Absolutely. Absolutely.
And was that the same thought process behind opening stores fairly early on in your journey? And today, for many D2C brands, the playbook is like, don't open stores till you hit a particular revenue scale, or, you have the right location or the right budget. But given you are that second skin product, did you feel like, hey, let's open stores, like as early as possible in our own journey, because touch and feel and just experiencing buying lingerie in a very different way compared to what women in the country are typically used to will also win loyalty and will win customers.
So we did not think of it, experiential. We did not think of it, as a taboo being solved, because frankly, the reality is, and this is where at least I come from, is that every girl in every small town will have that one uncle which she's very comfortable with talking about. My dad used to be that uncle for almost 800 women, right? So he knew size of 800 women in the city. So, and very, very comfortable. So I think that's not the problem that we all face. I think the real thing that we wanted to do was that our whole intent was tier 2, tier 3. And that's the cool thing about the gang, that all of us are focused on just that. We say that, can you change more lives, and that's what we want to do for a living also, right? So when we started selling online, we realized that 65% odd business was coming from tier 2, tier 3, continues to be 63% today. And we realized that over a period of time, people getting onboarded on internet is going to take some time. So we said, if they can't come to us, can we go to them? Of course, we started with the tier 1 because that was the closest for us to attempt,
Yeah.
right? So our intent was that, can I have a viable model, to kind of go to smaller towns where the customer is not ready to come to me, and so I can at least go to the customer. So intent was purely to distribute, not to market, not to do touch and feels, because we knew that once the customer has bought from us, she's anyways going to come again.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's the predominant reason we did that. And we realized soon in our first store, the first thing we realized was that online and offline customers were very complementary. So we realized that there's no overlap. We are not kind of eating into the same, pie. And that's when we decided to.
And I'm sure you recollect the year, but help us in terms of time, the year in which you opened your first offline store. How early in your journey?
I think 2018 was when we opened up probably the first store. I think 17.
Okay.
Right. And for a very long time, we did a very small number of stores. Then 2020, we decided to scale, and then,
today you're at 50 stores.
So by that time, we had 2020, we had some 25 odd stores. And the idea was that, we will scale it big time. Right. And then COVID happened. And now.
So fair to say 3 years to store one. Like 15, I would say, is when Clovia as a brand came about.
Four stores. Yeah, 4 stores for almost 2.5 years. And now we are at 70, and we are way behind our targets right now. So we have to do 300 plus this year. So
fantastic. Yeah. And the other question I had, we spoke about manufacturing, distribution. The other one I had was, brand versus marketing. And especially if you're online first, the typical question that founders always ask is how many dollars to allocate on customer acquisition versus brand building, and then if there's offline as well for offline promotions, etc. Is there a playbook at all? But would love to learn what worked and maybe what didn't work for you. And again, if you could set this in a seed context where, as always, you're constrained for capital.
Right. So its answer is a little rhetorical, but sometimes it's rhetorical because it's true, right? So everybody says the same thing. But I think one thing that worked for us is to figure out a channel-wise LTV. If you and you don't need to do like an LTV plan. If you just see your cohorts, you will see that certain channels might be getting you business at a very, very low CAC, right? But you might realize that over a period of time, if you do an analysis at a channel level, you'll see that people are not coming back from that channel again. So even though certain channels might be expensive in the first view, you might realize the quality of customer it's bringing in might be at much more higher value for you. So I think that was one principle we followed. Other was, and even today we do that, the only way to gauge your business is through repeats. If your business is bringing in repeats, then please invest in marketing. Otherwise, just stop and go back to fixing your product and your fit, product market fit before you spend the marketing.
Yeah. And Pankaj, moving beyond seed, right? Since that's what we want to focus on today, what really changed for you? And I know the other thing that I've always admired and appreciated is how little capital you've raised to get to the the 100 crore plus kind of brand scale that you got to. And I know there are numbers on Crunchbase, but in truth you've raised lesser than that. And you spoke earlier about it's not all the time that you have choices with capital, but as you were thinking about your next round, your Series A round, again, would love to get some of the thought process behind raising seed, how much of it changes as a founder listening to us today between just backing founders, a big market, a great idea, versus some of that actually now translating beyond the idea into how you have executed on the opportunity. But what are some of the things that worked for you as you're in the run up to your Series A raise?
I think the most important thing to understand for your own business is that, is it a winner take all category, or is it a category where a lot of brands or a lot of businesses rather will coexist, right? So if it was food delivery, it's literally probably top 2, top 1, and Amazon or a Myntra or a Flipkart. In our case, we were very clear that, this is a category where it's not a winner take all, right? She would have my product also in the wardrobe, and probably she'll end up attempting to try another product business as well. And we took a lot of guidance from that. And then we said that we do not need to, buy growth. And I think that's something which worked very well for us. So I think it's very, very critical to internalize and see that, what your business at a macro level is like, right? And I can't thank God enough that, it was always difficult to raise capital for us. It was always very difficult till the time we got to a point where capital became so easy that all of a sudden we realized that, the kindness of divine has showered on us. But till that time, it was extremely tough. And I think that was probably the best thing that could have happened to us, because that made us very prudent about capital. Two things that we did fundamentally was that every marketing dollar, even today, every 1 hour, there is an evaluation engine which every 1 hour is evaluating every single penny spent. So people say we do day end analysis, we do 6 hourly analysis, we do it hourly analysis at a bigger set of people level. And then of course at any point of time there are two people, which is a maker checker, who will keep seeing every penny being spent. So I think that's the intent, of how we have operated on the marketing side. And other is people. I did not have money to get people from, my own college, right, to start with, or from IIMs. And what I ended up realizing, and then there was a time when I ended up hiring a lot of people. What I've ended up realizing is that you need to find hungry people, right? And hungry and expensive are two different things. So I think you need to be very prudent with your capital, and you need to be very prudent with the kind of people that you bring on board. Whatever is flashy may not be the best for you, right? It may look very nice. It's a great talking point, but it may not sit well in the bigger scheme of things when your PNL comes into play. So I think you have to be a little bit more grounded in your approach. And last and most important, it flows from the top. So, if you feel that, you can get a pizza and say, put it on company's account, there are 20 other people who look at you and do the same thing. So that kind of discipline is also very critical.
Since you spoke about culture, I was actually going to ask, as a founder, this is always hard, right? Because you have this external role of you have to be out there pitching, raising money, and internally you're facing a whole bunch of peaks and troughs and maybe even like near-death situations several times. But how have you kept culture, morale up? And also actually would love to understand your talent strategy, because like you said, you couldn't afford people from your own alumni, like from IIT Delhi, and you have to choose wisely being the kind of people you want to hire and at what point of time you want to bring them on. But more in terms of just culture and just setting the tone from the top, what kind of culture did you set out to build, and how did you handle these stresses and really almost like this dual role of externally having to pitch and be all smiles and internally having to tell folks that we'll have to get through this lockdown or get through this fundraise process? And 10 years is a long journey, and I'm sure you've been through some of these moments.
Oh yeah, I think we have lots of those, enough to fill in hours and hours. So it's as crazy as that, we're raising a round, we're almost close the round. And so I was on the call with the banker for paperwork, right? So I stepped, and we had called in a meeting of my entire team where we were discussing the next phase of growth. So I stepped out, either a call came, I stepped out, and while and this is at my house. So I'm outside the terrace, I'm speaking to people, I'm looking at the team inside. So people are like excited and talking about how we plan the next 12 months. And the person calls them and says, boss, this is not going to work out. They've kept some demand, which I know that you are not going to agree to. And, I just put the phone down. I went back inside and I continued the conversation of growth. I said, at least let's plan growth. We'll figure out the money. So I think those kind of, you need to be very much in control of your emotions when it comes to, being an entrepreneur. You even if sometimes that I have to show certain, and when I say I mean for all of us, right? And we show certain craziness and things, but that is also very calculated, right? Because there is a message that has to go out. So I think your failures are yours and your successes everybody's is the way you should think about it, frankly. I think that's very critical, because you are not
success has many parents, but failure has an orphan.
correct. And it's not a bad thing, frankly. Because you took the responsibility of somebody's money, of somebody's career. So you then go through with it. Stop sulking about it, right? Because you're the one who asked for it and you got it. So be thankful and move on. I think that's the most important thing which I have seen within our team also. And can you keep team ahead of yourself? And that is something which I've learned from my co-founders, more than myself, is that can you keep the team ahead of yourself before you take any decision? The moment you start doing that, and you don't have to be very theatric about it, right? The moment you start doing that, it starts to reflect in the next year and the next year and the next year. So I think the moral of the story that we have tried to do is that a place where everybody is comfortable that you will be taken care of and will not be shortchanged, right? It's a place where you don't need to go out of the way and present somebody else's work as yours, and and you don't need to be political at all. So I think the only thing that we feel very proud of we managed to do well is that at least within Clovia's confines, there is never a worry that I did something but somebody else will get the credit, right? So I think the most important how the culture has worked out for us, to answer the question, the first question is that it's always keeping the next year ahead of yourself. And that's how it's percolated very well for us, and I can't thank God enough for it. And in terms of outward facing, I think there is a lot of people, and there was a lot of internalization, at least from my side, that should I change myself as a person? So we have this humble way of talking as a team, right? And or even funny way of talking at times. And I was checked by my bankers who said you need to be a little bit over the top. You need to be, you need to speak in a certain way. If you ta sar karoge, to you will not get the money, stuff like that. And what we really ended up deciding was that let's be ourselves, and it's all
Yeah.
right. So
Yeah.
we'll find out whether it was the right thing to do or not. And I think it's worked out well for us. So I think it's okay to be yourself.
Yeah.
If you are, if you're a certain way, you don't need to make yourself into somebody else to just to project yourself. You'll not be able to pull it off.
Yeah,
People
I
see the
think, yeah,
reality
best to be
anyways.
yourself because everyone else is already taken. So I think speaking about not being speaking about not being theatrical, I know that you have an interest in theater, and one way for you to deal with all of this has been theater for you. And overall, I think we don't talk much about hobbies, and I know you also practice meditation. But how, was this a realization much later in the day for you, or have you always practiced meditation or done theater or always had an outlet outside of work? And I know time is also obviously a big constraint, especially as an early stage founder. Every CXO is you, and the buck really stops at you. But just keen to understand at what point do you start like balancing, if not prioritizing, and what were your outlets through this journey? Yeah.
So I think from spiritual practices perspective, I was very fortunate. So I was 20 when I actually started doing Raj Yoga as a practice, and this was college time, right?
Yeah.
So, and the gentleman who taught me used to be an IT graduate, 70s batch, and it was phenomenal. So, and I think that has stuck with me forever, and that has probably is the only anchor that I have in life which keeps me afloat. I think any sort of meditative practice is a great idea because your mind needs to rest, your mind needs to rejuvenate, to rejig, and you cannot behave like a superhuman at all times. The laws of physics will play on you, right? So if energy is going out, energy has to come in some ways as well, right? So that is something which is constant. So there is no way in the world that I'll miss my practices or meditations if I have to get through the next day. Theater was something which happened to me in college, and and at IIT Delhi, and we were crazy. I mean, we were crazy. I must have lost 2 CGPA points because of my theater. And when I got out, I did it for some time. When Clovia happened, I just stopped doing it. And then all thanks to Neha, who I'm married to, and our son. My son was probably 5 or 6 at that point of time. So finally, I got to do theater again. This is before COVID. I did a Broadway musicals, Hindi adaptation. We did 14 shows. My son actually came to 10 of them, right? And
Wow. Yeah.
so I think it's a lot to do with everybody kind of coming together to support you. So I've been very fortunate there. But I think any sort of your own hobby, it just changes you as a person again. So I had run out of creative ideas completely, but the moment I started doing theater again, I was much more active in office, right? And I would not waste any time in of my work. So if I have to work till 9, then 9:30 I will start. 10 to 1 in the morning I'll do my practices. And thankfully a lot of other folks who were working on this project with me were also similar to me, so they
Mm.
also were okay to do
Yeah.
late nights. So
Yeah.
but even if it eats away some part of your sleep, please go ahead and
Make
follow
sure
your
you
hobby.
have a hobby or a talent or a sport or any of that.
It
Yeah.
does wonders. It does wonders to your life.
Yeah. And another thing that I've heard you talk often about is just invest, like I call it investor market fit, like, also choose your investors wisely. And many founders feel that, of course, not in markets like today, especially not everyone has a choice, is the answer. Some will give, others will say that, just take whoever gives you the first term sheet. But is there really a method to this, fundraising madness? And as you thought about your rounds, or like even an exit for that matter, did you really think hard and deep about, are you taking money from the right partner? Because it's just more than the capital. It's support in the bad times. It's actively supporting you as founders, enabling scale, etc. But take us through your thought process of just choosing your investors wisely.
I think if you're not getting money anywhere, and there's only one place that you're getting it from, then you'd rather deal with the devil and stay alive than to just die, right? So one is that. So, all the conversation about choosing comes when you have choices.
Yeah.
So, there have been times when there were no choices, right? And then you just go ahead and do your thing, right? Series A was, for example, was a very different scenario where we had choices. And there, what worked for us is spending a lot of time with people, right? I mean, the more you spend time with them, the more you understand, how those people are and how you'll get along with them. So we were fortunate the ways our series happened, right? And while we were explaining the story, a lot of people would call us multiple things, and I was trying to answer something, and then all of us had said, "Oh, this doesn't make any sense. Why are you trying to answer this? You're a brand. You don't need to talk about this." And I looked at Neha. She looked at me and said, "Aha, we got our guy, right?" So somebody who
Mm.
understands the story right away.
Mm.
So I think sometimes it just clicks, and you understand that somebody is getting what you're trying to say. If you have, these are all only cases when you have choices,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. The only thing that works out in that case is that A, spend a lot of time talking to the person. Second is just try and understand their, so if you're a brand business, you're a consumer business, and you're raising money from somebody whose entire portfolio is fintech, right?
Yeah.
So be aware that this is just capital. Then don't
Correct.
expect the person to all
Any
of a
type of
sudden
value
become
add.
very.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And then you can't complain also later, right?
Yeah.
Because you took that call. You knew the portfolio upfront, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think a majority of times you have a lot of information. The time was very different when we used to raise money in probably our first and second ventures. Right now, there's so much information about people. There's so many common connects for you to quickly understand how the person operates. But spend time, please spend time.
Yeah.
Don't take decision in one meeting. That probably is
Yeah.
not the thing to do.
Yeah. Just in the spirit of wrapping up and just last couple of questions, but one question I definitely wanted to ask you is, the classic, as you look back, I'm sure there's some decisions that were highlights for you now in hindsight, and we always say hindsight is 2020. But take us through some of those early decisions you made as a seed and Series A founder that you're very proud of today, or that you just felt like changed the trajectory of the business for you. And you may not have felt that at the time of taking the decision, but today, when you look back, you feel like those were like game-changing decisions.
I think one was banking on technology. I think there was a lot of question around that we are in the consumer business. Why do you have to harp so much about tech? And I think that is something which became our differentiator. Just the way we were able to plan inventories better, literally gave us more bang for our buck, right? We were able to manage our cash flows much better, gave the trajectory and the longevity to the business at the same time. So I think that is something which we are all very proud of. I'm talking as a group here. And the other thing is, when we did not fall prey to this whole get from China and publish, right, the product, we went back to doing the harder way of defining the supply chain ourselves. I think that became the core of our business, because and everybody used to call us a fool, that at that point of time not many people were, in our category, in bras for example specifically, were working with Indian factories, and only the not so good in quality ones were actually doing that. So, or the ones that were really doing well were the really, really large scale ones which could afford, a very different infrastructure. So I think that banking and on the fact that we were going to make only and only in India, that also gave us lot shorter lead times and managed to help us, our manage our capital way better. Had it been China or other place, neither we would have gotten the quality nor the controls. And of course, the capital would have been stuck. There would have been a dollar, pressure as well. So a lot of those things went away. A lot of people ended up emulating us, doing that, which is again better for the very good
Yeah.
for the ecosystem. So we take a lot of joy in that.
Yeah. I think if you see the homepage of WaterBridge, one thing that we are proud of as investors is we always say that we love to take contrarian bets and, find horses for courses and diamonds in the rough, as we say. And for me, a big reason why I wanted to have you, Pankaj, on this is for that. I think a lot of your bets and decisions were contrarian at the time they were taken, whether it was China versus, make in India. Today, make in India also has become a buzzword to like do your own manufacturing locally. Same with the omni and offline, setting up a store within your first 3 years. You said 4 stores in the first 3 years. Some of these decisions are contrarian. Many of them were actually ahead of the curve. So I think when you spoke about fashionable bets and just making lingerie as a category with multiple assortment, colors, sizes, choices, you mentioned that market also changed, macro also changed, and consumers were embracing this and were willing to try out new categories, new colors, new fits, etc. And that was really my question. When you take these decisions, you don't really know where you're ahead of the market and therefore your first mover and market will catch up. Or sometimes at that point might just seem like plain, like, shots in the dark or plain stupid, that should we be doing this at all. And I'm sure many of them never worked out as well. But another question, therefore, I get asked is how many of these should be just based on like gut and intuition and, feels from the market saying, hey, we should do this, we're slightly ahead, but still do it and bank on the fact that market will catch up. Because you got it right, I know, both with manufacturing and with Omni. But if you don't, of course, again, in a capital constrained situation, there is a price to pay for that as well. But would love to get your thoughts here. Yeah.
See, it's very simple. I can talk of a success story like Clovia where we thought something, it worked out.
Yeah.
Right. I started by telling you that I started with an edtech business, right, which was weird of its time, right? And there we had raised a lot of money, more than at that point of time, it was a very big amount, right, for an edtech business, right? And by 2012, I realized that I had 1.5 million students on the platform with 2% consumption. So I knew it's a marketing story, it's not a business, right? People are using me as a marketing tool, but nobody's consuming it or asking the students to consume. And that's when I decided to let it go. So I think it's you can only do your best in terms of understanding. So was that bet wrong? I am super happy that, I took that bet, because exactly the things that we did are the ones that some of the, and I've spoken to some of these unicorns who, when they were starting, came to me and said that, I'm going to just replicate Vritti. And, went on to raise money from all the marquee guys. So neither was EdTech wrong and nor is, Clovia right. I think it's a function of you taking the best bet basis a combination of, probably 30% gut and 70% data from the customer. The only thing that I take as a very clear indicator, which is otherwise an absolute no-no for me, is that how good is the consumption of what I'm making. And I think that's an absolute. It could be 100 people, it could be 1,000 people, it could be 20 people. But if you have 20 fanatics or 100 fanatics about your product, then you are on the right track. Then macros will define whether this 100 will become 100,000 or 100 million, right? Because you can't control the macros, but at least you are doing good for those 100 folks. Thereon, I think, it's just a function of will you live to tell the tale, when the macros turn to your side. I think then it's just a function of that. But I think the indicator has to come from consumption and feedback. Everything else is that. Please do not go on gut. If the world is telling you that your product is shit, it is shit. Trust me. It's not like the world doesn't know. Their ego cannot play a role.
Yeah. Awesome. On that note of always listening to your customers, I hope every founder, listens to us and takes your inputs on this. You have indeed lived to share this lovely tale and lovely story about Clovia starting off in 2012 all the way till an exit. And Pankaj, thank you so much once again for your time here today. Sincerely appreciated, and more power to all of you, and onwards and upwards to Clovia, first reaching the 100 store mark that you said you're behind on, but more importantly, becoming like a much, much larger brand. More power to you.
Thank you so much. Absolute delight speaking to you today.
Thanks, Pankaj. Take care.
Thank you for listening to Founder Forward, a podcast series produced by WaterBridge Ventures. WaterBridge Ventures is a leading early-stage VC fund in India, partnering with mission-oriented founders building game-changing businesses. The fund invests up to $3 million across seed to Series A rounds. With over 32 investments in 5 years, WaterBridge has backed leading companies like MagicPin, Unacademy, Doubtnut, and City Mall, among many others. With over $250 million in assets under management, WaterBridge also runs India's leading seed stage investment program called Fast Forward. The Fast Forward program invests up to $1 million in seed stage companies with a 7-day turnaround time for all founder pitches. Head to waterbridge.vc to learn more.